Visum et repertum. One of the most important sources for the history of vampirism is the report Visum et repertum, written and attested by military surgeons in Serbia on January 26, 1732. It was sent to the authorities in Belgrade and Vienna, and copied by envoys of foreign governments. Foremost, it was distributed in various versions to newspapers and scientific periodicals throughout Europe, causing a public as well as scientific sensation in many European countries throughout the year 1732. In fact, had it not been for this report, the word vampire and the stories of these supposedly blood-drinking corpses would probably not have become known, and consequently the popular vampire of authors like John William Polidori and Bram Stoker, as well as the vampire of 20th and 21st century popular media, would not have come into existence. A copy of the original manuscript is stored in the archives in Vienna, but the text is mostly known in somewhat different versions through various printed sources. Curiously, it has rarely been translated into English, and this is certainly also the case of the report from the first investigation of the vampire case in late 1731, and other documents commenting on the report. I have referred to this report and vampire case many times, but I think it's time to write a bit more about this document, the vampire case, and the historical background. Having defeated the Ottomans, the Habsburg Austrians entered a treaty with the Ottoman Empire at Pasarowitz, Požarevac, southeast of Belgrade in Serbia, in 1718, whereby parts of present-day Romania, a part of Bosnia and the northern part of Serbia came under Austrian rule. These areas that had recently become occupied were put under military jurisdiction. Due to the war, the area was very depopulated. The population did, however, const of different ethnical groups, including the Racians, Serbs of the Orthodox Greek faith. The occupied areas in Serbia acted as an enlargement of the so-called Militärgrenze, the military border, Confinium Militar, which was a buffer zone between the Habsburg and Ottoman empires. The zone was not only a buffer zone against military attacks but also against epidemic diseases, which had ravaged parts of Europe for centuries. In 1679, the plague had cost Vienna about 1/3 or 1/4 of its population, and as late as 1713 there had been a minor epidemic in Vienna. Epidemics were known to occur in the Ottoman Empire from time to time, and consequently it was necessary to stay aware of cases of epidemic deaths. So Austrian officials like military surgeons had good reason to be very cautious towards signs of inexplicable deaths. One case was reported to the commander of the Imperial Army in Jagodina, Colonel Lieutenant Schnezer, by inhabitants of the Serb village Medveđa, Medveda, or Medveđa, in the fall of 1731. Along with the local militia, the so-called Haiduks, they complained of several mysterious deaths. Schnezer consequently sent a contagions medicus, a doctor called Glaser, to Medveđa to investigate what had happened. Glaser arrived in Medveđa on December 12, 1731. Although he found symptoms from malnutrition caused by the fasting of the Orthodox villagers, he found no evidence of any epidemic disease. The villagers, however, claimed that symptoms like fever were the cause of the deaths of 13 villagers who had died within the past 6 weeks. They believed that the deaths were caused by bloodsuckers or vampires, which had been common among the Ottoman Turks. Glaser could not persuade the villagers from believing this. In fact, they claimed that they would have to move somewhere else if the authorities would not execute the vampires. Consequently, Glaser had 10 graves open to carry out an autopsy of the corpses. Some of the bodies had decomposed, but others had become bloated and bloody with fresh blood flowing from nose and mouth. For this reason, Glaser found it impossible to persuade the villagers from believing that their corpses had become vampires. In his report to the authorities, he asked for permission for their corpses to be executed, so the people could be calmed. Glazer's report was sent to the commander in Belgrade, who apparently decided to send a commission to investigate the matter anew. This commission was led by the regimental surgeon Johann Flückinger and arrived in Medveja on January 7, 1732. They interviewed the villagers, who said that a haiduk called Arnont Paoli had died in 1727 from a fall from a hay wagon. While alive, Paoli had often told that he had been harassed by a vampire when he was in another part of Serbia. To rid himself of the vampire, he had eaten soil from its grave and rubbed himself with its blood. But after some 20 or 30 days after his death, some of the villagers had complained of being haunted by Paoli, who had become a vampire. 4 villagers were claimed to having been killed by him. To rid themselves of the vampire, the villagers opened his grave 40 days after his interment and found his body uncorrupted. Fresh blood was flowing from his ears, eyes, mouth, and nose, and his clothing, and the whole coffin was bloody. According to the villagers, these were signs that he was a vampire, and they consequently drove a stake through his heart, which made his corpse groan and bleed copiously. Finally, the body was burned and the ashes buried in his grave. As the villagers believed that everyone killed by a vampire could become vampires themselves, they also dug up the corpses of the 4 people who had allegedly been killed by Paoli, and treated them in the same fashion as they had Paoli. Still, as Paoli had also sucked the blood of cattle, the people who had eaten the flesh of those animals also risked becoming vampires. During 3 months in late 1731 and early 1732, 17 villagers, young as well as old, had died. Some of them had become ill suddenly and had died after 2 or 3 days of illness. The daughter-in-law of a haiduk, Stanoika, had lain down to sleep healthy, but woke up with a terrible scream at midnight, frightened and shaking, complaining that she was being suffocated by Milo, a man who had died 9 weeks before. She then got a strong pain in her chest and got worse and worse until she died after 3 days. The villagers told this on January 7, 1732, to the commission consisting of Austrian military officials, including 2 subordinate medical officers. After interrogating the villagers, the commission went to the cemetery, exhumed and examined the 17 corpses. The minority of the 17 corpses had corrupted, whereas most of them were found in a to all appearances incorruptible state with fresh blood within the body. This was e.g. the case of the 60-year-old woman called Melisa, who was believed to be the cause of the deaths, because she had eaten the flesh of sheep which had been killed by a vampire. She had died after 3 months of illness and had been buried 3 months previously, although she had all her life been skinny. Much to the amazement of the villagers, her exhumed body was fattish. In the cavity of her chest, fluid blood was found, and the intestines were uncorrupted. The above-mentioned Stanoika was, 18 days after her burial, found with a ruddy and lifelike face. Under her right ear was found a blue bruise of a finger. A quantity of fresh blood flowed from her nose when she was taken out of her grave, and fluid blood was found in her chest and heart. All the intestines, the subcutis and her nails were fresh. After the examination of the bodies, the corrupted bodies were replaced into their graves, while the rest of the bodies were decapitated and burned by local gypsies. Finally, the ashes were thrown into the river Morava. On January 26, 1732, the medical officers of the commission described their findings and acts in the report Visum et repertum, seen and found, and sent it to the authorities in Belgrade, who forwarded it to the war council at the court in Vienna, along with a request for remuneration of Flückinger and his 2 colleagues. The council dealt with the matter on February 11, but more correspondence was necessary before Flückinger and his fellow officers received their remuneration in November 1732. In the meantime, however, The report had been reprinted in various newspapers and journals, causing a large-scale debate in certain parts of Europe. This sensation was helped on its way by some of the people who were somehow connected with what had happened. As early as the very day that the Visum et Repertum was signed, i.e. on January 26, 1732, a standard-bearer serving in Serbia, von Kottwitz, wrote a letter from Belgrade to Professor Michael Ernst Ettmüller in Leipzig asking for an explanation of the phenomena observed. Glaser himself tried to attract some attention to his experiences by first sending a copy of his report to the Collegium Sanitatis in Vienna, and later on to his father, Johann Friedrich Glaser. Glaser Sr. wrote about it to one of the editors of the scientific journal Commercii Literariae ad Re Medicae et Scientiae Naturalis Incremamentum Institute, published in Nuremberg. His letter was published in Latin in the journal on March 22, 1732, and caused a debate on vampires in that journal which lasted for the rest of the year. Meanwhile, Karl Alexander, Prince of Württemberg, who had been in charge of Serbia and Belgrade, was traveling to the court of King Friedrich Wilhelm I of Prussia in Berlin. Apparently, they discussed the Visum et Repertum, because the king asked the Royal Prussian Society of Sciences to state a verdict on the contents of the report. The society convened on March 7 and finished a statement on the vampires or bloodsuckers on March 11, in which they stated that all the phenomena that had been observed on the examined corpses could be explained by well-known natural processes, particularly in Leipzig, but also in other places. However, the matter of vampires and how one were to explain the apparent incorruptibility of the corpses, the illness of the victims, and the claims concerning being haunted by vampires, were debated in numerous books and journals. Later on, the vampire case from Medveja was retold numerous times. The names of persons and places were changed along the way. So sometimes Arnont Pauli became e.g. Arnaud Pauli or Arnold Paul. In the middle of the 19th century, Herbert Mayo decided to try and use the romancing vein to try and restore the original colors of the picture, i.e. he dramatized the story when he recounted it in his letters on the truths contained in Modern Superstitions that were first published in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine. It is this version that is more or less used by Dudley Wright and Montague Summers, and it is amazing to find that the original colors of the picture include a story of doomed love between Arnaud Paoli and his neighbor, Nina. Curiously, we are even told that it was on a grey morning in early August that the commission visited the cemetery of Medwenia, although we know it actually happened in January. The tradition of mixing up fact and fiction when it comes to vampires apparently is far from new. When it comes to the name of Arnont Pauli, Arnand Pauli, Arnaud Pauli, or however it is written, one theory is that the name was actually Pavel, and that Arnont was actually a title or description, namely that of Arnaut, a Turkish word for the people of Albania. Medveja, in my opinion, is the village Medveja close to the Zapadna Morava branch of the Morava River, not to be confused with the much larger city of Medveja that was outside the part of Serbia occupied by the Austrians in 1732.